So I have three props. First one is from 1901. I'm going to refer to this in a little bit. Second one is I got for $2, 1952 telephone book. I'll tell you why that's here in a moment. And then the last one is a really good plan that was constructed in 1962. But first, let me tell you a little bit about my background. So I grew up in New York City. That's my dad. I'm the older son. That's my little brother. In New York City, I would go to friends' houses after school, and I would go home a different way than my friends would go home. When my friends would get picked up, their parent or guardian would take them on the bus or take a cab. My dad always would show up, often in polyester shorts, and we would run home. We'd run home no matter what the weather was, no matter what the distance was, going through different neighborhoods. Felt like a mailman. No sleet, hail didn't stop us. And in the 70s, before eBay, people threw stuff out. And as we were kind of navigating, if we saw interesting goods, like I remember rolling literally a manhole cover home, and we made it into like an end table that's still in our house, and a really fancy restaurant that we could never afford. One day they decided to upgrade their parquet floor. So I learned what repeats were because I ran back and forth with my dad, bringing these tiles like the Celtics basketball floor, and to this day we have that floor. So I also realized a pattern that when I started going to a particular friend's house, that my dad would take me home a different way every time. And I realized you can go from one point to another in an infinite number of ways. That got me thinking. So when I went to high school, I didn't need to be chaperoned anymore in getting around. And kind of like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, I'm probably dating myself, where the guy was obsessed with something, I became obsessed with annually making a pilgrimage down the length of Manhattan, down Broadway. It's an old Native American trail, and I would run the 13 miles. And it was fascinating to go through Spanish Harlem or the Orthodox Jewish community. Sometimes I did this on the 4th of July wearing fluorescent shorts, spandex. It's, again, dating me too. But I love seeing the transitions of neighborhoods from one to the other. So when you think of Broadway, the theater district is way down here. There's all these other interesting neighborhoods to see. So when I graduated from college, I wanted to continue, exploring. But I wanted to empower others to explore. So I helped start this little nonprofit where we would recruit volunteers to teach from the passion of their lives, a textbook of their lives, and use the city as a classroom and create 10-week apprenticeships for 9 to 14-year-olds. And here's Sharnique. And her personal video game was wearing a hood over her head and not talking to anyone for a whole week. And if she didn't talk to anyone, she won. And we found some crafty Brown student who would program the game Tetris as like a practical joke on the side of the Brown University Library every year to come and teach computer programming. And Sharnique loved that. And she went to the Society of Engineers conference. She sat on a Harley Davidson, and she said out loud, "I'm going to be an engineer," because she worked with this person on programming. Here's another student that argued all the time, and often it ended badly. And we found a lawyer who just was miserable at practicing law, but loved teaching Sean to be logical and win arguments. And Sean got to do this a number of times. This organization, we recruited 1,000 Google employees to teach 10-week apprenticeships, 1,000 Fidelity employees. It's now a $45 million nonprofit. Larry Summers, former Secretary of the Treasury, is our board chair. And thousands of people are democratizing teaching and helping inner city kids understand what's possible. So more recently, with a bunch of people, I started Ideas in Action, and I took 7 classes at Harvard Business School, and I was really trying to figure out good leadership. And everything that we're doing with this, none of it was covered in those classes. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's a passion project. A bunch of us are organizing, and we're drawing upon the best of TED. TED costs $8,500 to go to, and that's the bargain basement level. It fills up in 15 minutes, a year ahead of time. It's harder to get into than the Oscars. And I said, wait a second. I want to create an event that's easier to get into and can have equally big impact. So in addition to having amazing, kick-ass speakers, we may need to edit that line, have amazing speakers. We say, let's do field trips with the speakers. So here we had someone who is an expert at ancient Chinese instruments doing a petting zoo with those instruments. Here we have a climatologist taking a bunch of people out and actually lobster boat fishing and talking about what's really going on. This was when lobsters were ridiculously cheap, and we figured out if there was a correlation between that. This is outside of Terrafugia. We signed NDAs because we couldn't go in and tell you what we saw, but it was awesome. And Terrafugia is making the flying car. And we went to Terrafugia the day before Oshkosh. And if anyone knows the air show scene, Oshkosh is the biggest air show in the world. So this is like going to Apple the day before the iPhone was launched and seeing what it's like as they're prepping the product. And in this day, they moved the propeller from the front to the back, and it was a really big deal. And we love that. Here we did a field trip with a guy who's done 8,000 laparoscopic surgeries. Now, before this, I didn't know the difference between liposuction and laparoscopic surgery. There's a big difference. And we got to use the tools. We brought some students, some kids who were expert at video games, and we tried to see if there was a correlation to doing well in Angry Birds and doing well at surgery. There isn't, by the way, so if your child tries to tell you, or there wasn't that day. So now I'm at MIT. And at MIT, I'm part of a group that is creating hardware and software to create cameras of the future. And we have a camera that takes 1 trillion frames per second. We can use that to see around corners. It's pretty cool. We also recognize that this is a very, 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 very dynamic time to be in the image space. There's all sorts of things happening. And what we decided was we wanted to use our technology, our ability to fabricate things, our ability to harness the cloud and mobile and big data to create low-tech medical devices. So this is one device that we've created, where if you take pictures of the back of your eye, the one place you can get blood flow without invading your body with like a needle, that you could get information, predictive analytics on your health. You could know your health before your doctor does. And like brushing your teeth, this could be a game changer. So imagine if you used your cell phone like this every day. And in addition to getting information on yourself, what if that information was pooled for your zip code or your city or your state or your region? Maybe it could predict, like we predict wildfires and weather in very interesting ways. So the group I'm part of, we're coming up with these ideas. And then we're going into communities and working with clinicians. We're getting engineers to work with clinicians to build these devices. And we're working with patients to get an immediate feedback loop on these devices. Here's some of the folks in India that we're working with to help us. And these are all the devices that we've created to date. So here's my dad. Now, my dad was running I could see the reflection there, so I have to look there. My dad was running way before the running movement started. And he works in this building. It's like the Pentagon of legal buildings in New York City. It's pretty ridiculous. You can't walk in a straight line. It's an 8-sided building. Law and Order's filmed in there, whatever. So my dad, during his lunch hour, as the judges were walking back and forth, would run around the inside corridors. It was like running in the Starship Enterprise. He would run around. And was really into running. And I saw him do 2 races in my life. And one race, it was a 10-mile race. He decided to do a second time, and I went with him as a 7-year-old. And I said, hey, Dad, we're waiting online to pick up his number. I said, hey, I'd like to try to do the race. And so we get to the stand, and the guy says, we have another sign up, and boom, I ran my first race. Now, my dad didn't wait for me. He just went in the race, and it was out and back, and he waved, go get him, son. So I wore a bathing suit because I thought that's what athletes should wear. And I came in, listen to this, I came in 3rd in the race for my age group, which was 15 and under, and there were only 3 of us. And to this date, there was a grandma that touched me out right at the end, and I can't tell if she had like just jumped out of the sideline or not, but I did finish that race. And I feel like my dad's running and my dad giving me access to that gave me permission to do ridiculous things. And a few years ago, my oldest son, Javier, said, hey, Dad, I see you run to work. I know you've done 70 half Ironmans. You're nuts. Can I kind of try one of these race things? And I said, sure. And at the age of 7, he did a race. But what I want to point out is my younger daughter at age 4, who couldn't even tie her shoes, said, "Hey, Dad, I want to do a race." And she did it in style. And she wore training wheels, and she just ran and ran and just made me so proud that day. And here's my youngest. So that was Lucia Dora. This is my youngest, Mateo. And Mateo is equally curious and likes to do sports. Now, I had these 3 items up here. This one is from 1901. This is a school registry. And if you look in here, there's a page per person. And it says what the parent's occupation was. And in some fountain pen, it says blacksmith for some of them. It's very interesting. They marked when kids didn't show up. They didn't mark who showed up. So I think that's the wrong way to track. I think half the battle is showing up. And the fact that you all are here at the first of these events, a lot of people are going to claim they are at the first one and they weren't, but you are. So half the battle is showing up. The other battle to be aware of is you never know who's in the room. So I bought this for $2. If you flip through this, you can find MLK, Martin Luther King Jr.'s telephone number. Malcolm Little went on to be Malcolm X. John F. Kennedy. So in this room, you don't know who can combine and form the next Google. You don't know who can be so inspired by one of the talks that might go on to do some powerful things. Who can be the next Joe DeSena out of this room? And the last prop I want to show is this big plan. Now, how many of you have heard of the Hoover Dam? If you haven't been there, I did the World Championship, whatever, Ironman, and it's right there in Nevada. This project, the Central Artery project, is bigger than that. The Hoover Dam was in Superman when, you know what thing I'm talking about. So the Central Artery project is in Boston. And what happened was they built a highway to get trucks quicker across the peninsula of Boston. And they totally cut off the water. And when they built it, they immediately realized this is a dumb idea. And it was the bane of everyone's existence. And cities were just laughing at Boston for creating this scar right through the center. It's right through the north end. And for $17 billion, we depressed it. And people said it would have been smarter to do open heart surgery on a tennis player or raise the whole city than having to depress that highway. But we depressed it. Now, the reason I hold this up, in 1962, this was the plan to create the highway that we spent $17 billion to depress. So I hold this up saying we should have a plan, but it needs to be a good plan. And the fact that we're kind of checking off out of society, we don't have internet down here, we're sort of off the grid. We're in this beautiful place in Pittsfield, Vermont, at this farm that just will make an indelible mark on our lives. Let's use this time to come up with a plan and come up with the right plan. And we can get 3 million views. We could influence a lot of people. And we can challenge the world. And the last 2 images I want to leave you with is I was out in the desert when all these birds came out. And they were squawking and making so much freaking noise right here. And it was kind of like the dialogue that's going on around health and wellness. More push-ups, eat bananas, do this, do that. And you don't know which way to go. And out of these birds, a V was formed. And if you know anything about these Vs, and I don't, but someone told me this, that it's not clear who's leading, but they are making something happen. And I think we all, as a community, need to start taking some leadership. And 431 is about that. Bunch of Spartans. I wasn't there, but back in the day, they punched way above their weight level. They were brave, they were wise, they worked in teams, mind and body. And we represent the best of that tradition.